time.
Sweet.
And I guess to kick things off, I approached Davidson maybe a month ago and was like, Davidson, I want you to tell your story because I know you've mastered the art of bringing your passion and your career together. And I thought, like, who better, especially after working together at Yelp way back when, which seems like it was 30 years ago, even though it was like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I loved how you've grown since then. So was very excited to have this conversation as the second Soulful Sips, and we actually have someone else joining. And I will let you take it from here because I'm sure you have an action-packed conversation for us.
Yeah, thank you, Dwight. It's funny to reflect. So Dwight used to be my manager actually when I was at Yelp, where you were I guess the training manager, right? So yeah, it's just crazy to think like so much has happened for both of us within that time, from going to PEO, right, with TriNet and JustWorks, and a lot of synergies. But yeah, it's just, I remember it's crazy to think that the last time we saw each other in person, I was crying in a room with you about how I was like not happy with my career, and like I was just very depressed, like was going through like a lot of mental health stuff. And I think that was like my breaking point when I met you, was when I first started going to therapy. And therapy for any person of color is like that's like taboo, right? Like we just don't do that. It's kind of just tough it out and kind of just deal with your issues. But ultimately, yeah, I think like just dealing with intergenerational trauma like has had me just be really reflecting like, hey, am I doing this because others want me to do it, or am I actually doing this because I enjoy it? So
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you so much for your support, and you held so much space, and you were able to just be there for me. And I really appreciate that, because I was going through like a lot of stuff at that time. So appreciate you, Dwight.
For sure. I mean, and it's wild you say mental health taboo, and it's still taboo, right? Even with the Olympics, with like Simone Biles and everything that's happening. So hopefully now with what we consider, the greatest like gymnast ever goes through mental health issues, like, okay, then I go through mental health issues as well.
Yeah, exactly. And being in sales, right? Like being an individual contributor, just having a bag, like having a quota, is still very stressful, like I mean, I'm very fortunate. I'm doing pretty well, like one of the top performers, like, but still like you said, like on the outside, it looks great. Like I help orphans, I'm, helping building schools in Africa, doing all these amazing things. But internally, I'm like, dude, like, am I capable of doing everything? And the YouTube channel, the podcast, the books, like there's just a lot. So there's definitely days where I'm like, man, like, am I taking on more than I can handle? And but at the end of the day, like, it's nice to have these spaces where we can talk about this openly and not have to like think about like, I guess I'm grateful that I had these breakdowns and crying in a room with you, because now I'm like, man, like I can't believe that happened. Like that's so embarrassing,
Not embarrassing. Everyone does it, man.
Yeah. But yeah, I remember that. Like it was like there's so many people, and I'm like, man, like I'm doing well at work. Like why do I feel like I'm just not happy? It's like it's weird. It's hard to describe sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, imposter syndrome is real, right?
Yeah.
So
And being a person of color as well, right? Like I feel like you look around, and especially in the client facing like revenue generating roles, like sometimes I'm like, man, this my teammate, he's like professional athlete, almost got drafted to the MLB, and I'm like this short kid who's like, you know what I mean? Like there's just a lot of, it's hard to not compare yourself, like, because the trainer looks a certain way, like everyone has like beautiful blue eyes and blonde hair and stuff like that, and you're just like, dude, like I feel so out of place sometimes.
yeah. And I guess how have you been able to internalize that and kind of move forward? Because I mean, it was something at one point when I was even at Yelp, was just like, what? So how do you take that from, something that could kind of hold you back, if you will, to something that could be like a passion?
Yeah, it's tough, right? I think like I've noticed like because of my podcast, I'm up to episode 130 now. I've interviewed a lot of other like Asians that have and I saw that, oh, they don't have that context. Like they don't feel like it's bad that they're Asian. Like they actually own it and they embrace it. And I've learned that like, oh, okay, like, like the fact that my mom does nails for a living, my dad's an Uber driver, like that's not necessarily a bad thing. That helps me really just, once I accepted it and I'm like, I'm never gonna change who they are. Like they're just gonna be who they are. I was able to just accept other aspects of my life. Like I'm always gonna be short, right? Oh, always I'm always gonna be like energetic and lead with my feelings instead of being more thinking and focused. So I just try to own that, like I'm always going to be more emotional, selling based, like building relationships instead of trying to be like these other reps that like come from more like all American families. And like, like I just was able to like, okay, I'm going to try to be less like them and just more like myself.
Man, that is literally the key. I
Yeah.
remember even like myself at Yelp, I was trying to be what they trained me to be.
Hmm.
And I remember walking to like someone's going away party, and
Yeah.
a friend called me, and I was talking to them very like straightforward as I am. And I got off the phone, and Dan Meek, my manager, literally was like, "What the hell is that?" He was like, what? I don't know what the hell you've been doing on the phones. Do that on the phones.
Hmm. Huh.
And once I, started just being myself, it was like life, not life changing, but I guess it was because I was on a couch in Manhattan. But it was like game changing for me in terms of like my career.
Yeah, I remember because you were always very passionate about what you did, and you definitely were more like held people to higher standard, right? Like not everyone, I think there's like managers that are more like, trying to say nice things to make people happy, and like you definitely don't sugarcoat things, right? But we appreciate that about you because like you were able to just be Dwight, right? Like you're always someone that's like, hey, if like you need accountability, you need like someone to stand for your greatness, like Dwight's your person, right? But there's also managers like maybe I need someone to give me a pat on the back, like like I'd go for them. Like I wouldn't go to you if I'm like, hey, like tell me I'm awesome, right? Like you'd be like, I'm like, hey Dwight, I want to break records. Like I'm gonna reach out to Dwight.
For sure. All right, let's bring it full circle. So after doing all of this, I know you got into coaching, and from what we've talked about and what I've seen, it really seemed like it kind of took off, uh, blending passion and career. So
Yeah.
give us a little insight into how you've been able to do that as well.
Yeah. So I've had like I'm only 30, I'm turning 34 this week, but I've had like 30 different jobs as a 34-year-old, which is pretty unconventional, I would say, by societal standards and in general, like it's frowned upon to have that many jobs. But I've loved every the whole experience, right? So I I I think LinkedIn, well, TriNet, I would say was like when I kind of like found I was like very present to like, wow, I'm really good at this like networking thing. I'm really good at this, um, connecting people together thing. And then I was like, okay, that's when I started to see like, okay, like I can actually be good at sales instead of like trying to compare myself to others. And then I was always passionate about LinkedIn. So when I got the job at LinkedIn, man, that was when I had like the most imposter syndrome because I was just like, man, all these people at LinkedIn come from like Yale and Princeton and HBS and all these like amazing backgrounds. And I was just like, dude, like I barely graduated from college. But yeah, I think like I was just like, all right, well, what do I like really care about instead of like looking at like, oh, how much money they're gonna pay me, or oh, I'm gonna be working with hedge funds. And before I was thinking too much like external perception, like how will others perceive this position that I get to rub shoulders with lawyers and partners of law firms and accounting firms and stuff like that. So I was thinking too much about like, oh, this looks good on paper, and less about like what do I actually care about. So when I got into training and development for LinkedIn Learning, I was like, whoa, like this is actually, now I see what it's like to actually enjoy coming to work, like actually like enjoy what I do for a living. And then someone reached out to me, a headhunter reached out to me on LinkedIn, of course, like while I was working at LinkedIn. So it's kind of a weird meta thing. But I was like, whoa, there's a company that is actually just providing executive coaching and coaching for every employee, democratizing coaching for the world. Like that's amazing. So it kind of fell on my lap, and I was doing pretty well at LinkedIn. I was one of the top performers. I was, winning a lot of awards and just crushing it. But I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm actually, instead of thinking about like how others will perceive me and like why would you ever leave an awesome company like LinkedIn, like I was just like, I'm just gonna trust my intuition and trust my gut and actually follow my heart, and ended up like being a great decision. Now we have people joining from LinkedIn every week, so it ended up being like a good decision. But yeah, I think there was like tons of people that reached out to me that were like, dude, like why would you ever leave LinkedIn? It's like the golden handcuffs thing, you know?
It's funny. Chantel, which we both know, also recently left LinkedIn. I was like, oh man, it's like a mass exodus. But I think it's also
Yeah.
like you all have been there for, more than what, 3 years or 3 years or so. So it makes sense. Like, what more can I do? What new challenge can I find?
Yeah.
And what's the challenge you're most excited about now, kind of mixing both your passions?
Yeah. It honestly like doesn't feel like work, like which is like so cliche. Because I used to hate when people say that. I'm like, shut up, like, that's not real. Like, I don't believe you, but I actually like genuinely like enjoy like waking up. Like, I actually look forward to Mondays, like I don't know. I feel like not many people could say that. And yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing, because I think most of us, it seems like a lot of people, I know more people that don't like working, don't like going to work, than actually like working. So I'm like, yes, I feel very lucky right now.
That's awesome. And just because I don't know if everyone knows like your full story, let's get the high level kind of full story about yourself as well.
Yeah. So I guess I've technically been in sales most of my life. So I've done like waitering. I think I've sold door to door, Verizon Fios, Cutco knives.
Cutco. Oh, they got you right
Yeah.
after high school.
Yeah, that was during high school, like during the summers and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, my background, like I've done like everything. I was pre-med, pre-dental, like typical like Asian path thing where like that's what a lot of my friends did. So I'm like, yeah, that's what my parents would want me to do. So um yeah, I think I didn't realize, because I think most people don't say like, oh, when I'm like a kid, I'm like, I want to be in sales for the rest of my life. Like I don't think that's like a thing. Um, but then once I started like meeting people like yourself and others, that I'm like, wow, like there's like these salespeople are doing pretty, get to travel the world and go to so many conferences, do all these cool things. I'm like, this is actually like a legit career, but I think many people still don't know. Like I'm a part of an Asian fraternity, and there's like 2,000 of us. And I think most people are like, wouldn't say like, hey, I think you should be a career in sales. Right. So I think, after like now I'm like, oh, okay, like I see that, we make like the same type of money as doctors and lawyers and stuff like that. But I didn't even know this existed. So for me, like when I first got into sales, like, I didn't know that you can make like 200, 300, $1 million in sales. But now that when I became an SDR, I was like, I was working with enterprise AEs that were making 500,000 to 1 million. I was like, oh, okay, like this is actually possible. So for me, it just opened up the opportunities. And then now I share that with a lot of other Asian folks, because they don't know that that's a career path.
Yeah, that's something I've been like passionate about as well, because when I got in at like, I think there's one understanding. Some are a decent amount of people understand sales, right? And when I say that, like if I say pharmaceutical sales, like, oh, okay, right. But then now explaining tech sales to them, and like I've been
Yeah.
in tech sales for 9 years. I swear for the first 5 years when I would go home, everyone thought I was an engineer or like an
Oh,
architect or
okay.
something.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what are you doing, Yelp? I'm in sales. So what? So like, what part of the product?
Right.
And just
Yeah.
then explaining like, oh, like this is what this is.
Yeah.
And even and maybe you've had to do this as well, like even explaining when your company gets a funding round, like what a series A is or what a series C is, and
Yeah.
like what that impact means. And like, all right, like, hey, like when you start a company, you have a product, it's an MVP, right? You get some
Yeah.
money. And like I remember like explaining that to my mom, and she was like, so next level on that
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
So love that you're like getting more folks in, that look like you in sales as well.
Yeah, and then to your point, like my mom still doesn't understand what I do. She's like, "Wait, so you sell like software, like CDs and like computers? Like you sell like laptops and stuff like that?" And I'm like, "How do I explain software to my mom? You know, I don't know. Like I still don't think she gets it." So when I was working at LinkedIn, it was easy for her to say to her friends, you know, because Asian moms like to brag about their kids, right? So she'd be like, "Yeah, he works at Microsoft." You know, because Microsoft owned
Right,
LinkedIn.
right.
So they're like, yeah, he sells computers and stuff like that. I'm like, all right, if
I
that makes
love
it
it.
easier to comprehend to your other, you know, like her friends are also nail technicians, like, you know, that's fine, you know. But yeah, I mean, I think she's just happy now that I'm happy because like she'd be like, are you happy? You know, and then when I was earlier in my sales career, like I wasn't. And I think she sensed that, you know, so I think I gave her some anxiety because I'd be like, I'm like, no, mom, like I'm just doing this because it pays the bills, you know. But now I can generally like say that, you know, I'm happy. And before I think I was like, I put a lot of pressure because I'm like, oh, I need to buy my mom a house because she came here as a refugee from Vietnam. She escaped the war. Like I need to give back to her. But I think now she's just happy that I'm happy, you know.
That's awesome. All right, last thing I want to ask you, and then want to open it up to anyone else, or just have a conversation with everyone. Um, what's the biggest lesson you've learned so far in sales?
Um,
Actually, let's take that in two-folded, in sales and in life.
ah, yeah, that's tough. I would say like just being open to unlearning. Like I think because I've done all these Tony Robbins and all these conferences and all this cool stuff, like now it's hard for me to like unlearn and like I never thought I would take a remote job. Like I'm definitely like an in-person type of person, hold tons of networking events and kind of like working at LinkedIn, it was like amusement park. There was like 2,000 people in the Empire State Building where we just kind of vibed. And so I think for me to like push myself like, well, what would it be like to take a remote job and being like what people say the most extroverted person they've ever met? What would it be like to challenge yourself to like just be with yourself and be okay with not having to be externally stimulated all the time? What would that look like? So just really challenging myself to be really uncomfortable by doing things like that has helped me grow and helped me like just appreciate like having a date with myself, right? Like that's super uncomfortable for me. And so I think the pandemic has helped me really like be okay with not having to like be successful and being okay with like, hey, dude, not everyone's gonna like you. And that's fine, you know.
I love to date yourself. I need to go on a date with myself soon.
Yeah, that's an excuse for me to spend a lot of money on nice like restaurants and not feel bad about it, you know.
Absolutely. All right, I want to open it up to anyone else. If anyone else wants to hop in and ask Davidson a question, please do, or we can just have an open conversation. You do have to take yourself off mute.
Um, Davidson, I'd love to know more because I know you said you were doing lots of different things and your wife, you're up until 1 in the morning. So it would be great just to know a little bit more about your non-work work.
uh yeah, I'm very passionate about my non-work work. So thanks for asking. I think like what helped me like really feel like a sense of purpose in life is I was very fortunate that at LinkedIn we had a lot of social impact related activities. So I mentor, which is a 4-year commitment where you get paired up with like a lower socioeconomic student. So my mentee came from the Dominican Republic. So that 4-year commitment like had me really like, man, like I don't want to be someone that's a hypocrite. So just be more intentional about like who I'm being in the world. And then a buddy of mine helped me get introduced to the Orphans Future Alliance. So we help orphans in Vietnam do a mentorship program where a lot of them, come from broken households, abusive families, and things like that. So just creating like a year-long program where we support them by buying the books and providing money for the orphanage, the shelter, and activities to help them learn things like negotiating and table manners and respect and things like that. like really gives me a lot of fulfillment. And then I remember for Build On, like that's like building schools in Nepal and Malawi and a lot of third world countries. I remember seeing the schools like and just feeling so happy that like, hey, like I get to contribute. And you know, because I think in Western society, like we have so much wealth and so much, you know, sometimes I feel guilty. I'm like, man, I just spent $300 on this meal. Like that's ridiculous, you know? And not to make it wrong, but I think like just giving back and helping out like other folks that have similar, also come from broken households like myself, like just showing them that, hey, it's possible that you can get out of this. Like you don't have to work at Dollar General. Not to say that's bad. Like there, I think, but just to show them that it is possible has helped me really. You know, I know my wife would say like, hey, like dial it back a little bit, but I think it has really given me a lot of purpose and fulfillment, and knowing that, you know, I'm not just like a salesperson that's buying like nicer houses and stuff. I think that's nice too, but I think there's just more to life than, you know, buying a super nice car and things like that.
Davidson, funny thing, because it's essentially what it sounds like you're saying. I saw this meme or something on social media the other day, and it said, the biggest flex in life is not what you can buy or purchase, but it's the impact that you bring on people. And that was like so profound to me, because that's something where 5 years ago, all I cared about was making as much money as possible. Whereas now it's literally like, how many people can I impact? And then like look back and say like, man, I helped them get there. And like, that's just amazing to say.
Yeah, and it's weird, right? Because like the less we focus on money, the more it comes to us too. It's like so weird, because I feel like I definitely think about money less than I usually do. And you know, I had 5 employee referral bonuses this month, because I was just like, and I didn't think, that's not why I referred them, right? But I was just like, hey, I think this would be great for your career, you know, like come join us. Um, so yeah, it's so weird. Yeah, thanks, Kim. Really, it was nice meeting you.
Then you off mute.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about that imposter syndrome. I'm like at a company now at the C-Vent, where a lot of the people I work with have been doing this job for like 15, 20 years, just year over year of success and crushing it. And it's an events company that I started at like 6 weeks before the pandemic. So I've done fine, but it's been like, I just feel like scraping every minute, every hour. And it's been interesting to sort of understand that um, a lot of a lot of the ways I've kind of struggled under pressure over the last year and a half or so, and because I feel like of this imposter syndrome and feeling a need to prove myself as one of the newer people to a team, have really kind of hurt me in the long run. And sort of when I was able to feel a little bit of that pressure ease off and focus more on what my clients actually needed, what my team actually needed, and less about kind of my issues of had a son about 11 months ago, so huge financial burden, right? Being in the events world in this pandemic, where you know things have been pretty rough, but it's been what I was able to sort of focus on was like trying to help my SDR develop, and I just thought like, all right, if I'm like making an impact on this one kid's life, a positive impact, you know, then that'll be something that, you know, from this I can take away. At least I helped that one kid. And I think what I'm starting to feel as I hear you telling me all these things, Davidson, and is that I feel like now I should be doing more rather than just worried about, you know, my kid and my financial success and, you know, some other things with my wife's family that we that take up some headspace. I do feel like listening to you that I'm not doing enough for my community. And I'm curious to sort of understand, like, when you started these sort of things, when you started these volunteer projects that you're involved with, what was that first step? What was that? Like the first step of things, and what is the most awkward, where you don't understand, like where you can help? What are really your particular strengths and passions. And I want to sort of understand more about, what was going through your head, how you found the time, like, all those kinds of elements and taking that first step.
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely noticed like there were folks at LinkedIn that just had this energy that just was like, man, like I was like, I need to get to know them. So I had coffee with them. We're lucky that we had LinkedIn, we have our own cafeteria. So it was super easy to just go down and have coffee with folks and stuff. Um, but yeah, Zach and Andy. Well, so basically a lot of the President's Clubs winners, I would like just get to know them better. And then they're like, yeah, I do this thing build on, and we're going to Nepal like next month and would love for you to join me. And so I think I was just like attracted. I was just like naturally attracted to these folks who were just all like, they seem to have it all, right? Like they're like on the promotion track, like they mentor so many people. Like I see them during yoga classes. I see them during like the sustainability talks. I see them during like allyship workshops. And I'm like, I want to get to know that guy. And then naturally they just like invited me into the world. And then before you know it, you're like, oh, okay, I'm hanging out with all these like President's Club winners, and naturally helped me actually do better in because they were able to like mentor me and help me and stuff like that. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. I guess I feel like there's this time pressure. I feel like I only have so many hours in the day. I never, at the end of the day, have accomplished the things I wanted to do, and my goals
Yeah.
have been, very narrowly focused on, um, I don't know, it's just called my sales progression, right? So I feel
Yeah.
like finding it's interesting when you say that these people that seem to have time to do all this stuff and still like crush it. I don't that's I think more than anything what gives people imposter syndrome is figuring out like how do they even do it. But like
Yeah.
I don't know, do you feel like there are sacrifices you've made, things that you wanted to do that you haven't
Yeah.
been able to do because you've been, so I'm curious to understand like what are some of those sacrifices? What are some of the nonsense things I could be cutting out of my life to make some time for this more important
Yeah.
stuff?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, clearly my wife would say like, time to watch Netflix and stuff like that is being sacrificed, right? So, she would argue that like, but I think even that, like I'm making more of an effort. Like the Olympics are on, and we spend a lot of time watching the Olympics. Um, but yeah, I would say it's interesting because like, and my manager would probably kill me if she heard me say this, but I honestly I probably work like a 20 hours on like my actual core AE job, and the rest, like you said, mentoring the SDRs, like non-revenue generating stuff, like even recruiting folks to come to my company, like just really intentional about stuff like that. Um, yeah, I think because I'm generally like happier at work because I'm doing all this other stuff. So naturally it just makes me more effective because I feel like I really enjoy. Um, okay,
Yep,
cool.
it's a
Yeah,
have to
thanks,
have,
man.
but
Yeah.